Welcome to Sports Insider here on cleveland.com. I'm your host, Chris Fedor. Joining me today, Bud Shaw and Stan Lobbies at Browns training camp. What's up, Bud?
It's a downgrade is what they call that.
Well, I'll let you say that. I don't want to look like
I figured I would
guy.
before you did.
Coming up today on the show, we'll talk to Doug Lesmerises, our Ohio State reporter. He's in Chicago. Big Ten Media Days going on. Urban Meyer going to chat later this afternoon, and 3 Buckeyes as well. But as we mentioned, it is the first day of Browns training camp. People are very, very excited. So let's go out to Berea. Welcome Mary Kay Cabot, our Browns beat reporter, to the show. What's going on, Mary Kay?
Oh, all kinds of things going on out here today. Obviously, it's the first day that we've seen Terrell Pryor working as a wide receiver. And, of course, the first thing that stands out to you about Terrell Pryor, especially standing next to the Taylor Gabriels and Andrew Hawkins and the Shane Wins on the team, is just his enormous size. I mean, wow. If they can make something out of this, what a target to have in the red zone and in the end zone. He is towering over these smaller defensive backs. So, and you know what? When he was running around out there in positional drills and whatnot, he really looks the part. So, of course, nobody will know for sure until he actually gets the pads on and tries to go against the better defensive backs in the NFL. But boy, oh boy, if they can make something out of Terrell Pryor, if they can make a pass catch out of him, this would be a tremendous story.
Mary Kay, I know you spoke with Brian Hartline. What does he believe is going to be the biggest transition for a guy like Pryor, making a move like this 4 years into his career?
You know, just really the time frame. You know, Brian's whole point was, I've been doing this since I was, every day since I was 16 years old. And, here Terrell's trying to come in here and do this in a matter of weeks. So time is not on his side, but I think if he shows enough potential that they would almost have to try to find a way to keep him around in some way, shape, or form, because from what it looks like so far, he has enough athleticism to be able to help your football team in some way.
Mary Kay, does it get to a point when it comes to the Browns wide receivers that they're just looking for somebody that can bring things to the table that they don't currently have? It's kind of like Andrew Hawkins, Taylor Gabriel, the same kind of guy. Brian Hartline, Dwayne Bowe, the same kind of guy. Possession receivers. Does it just get to a point where they say, well, this guy has too much size, too much athleticism. That's not something that we currently have on the roster, so we have to bring that here.
Yeah, you know what? And I don't think it was a concerted effort to do that. I don't think they were like, hey, let's go find, a 6'5" guy because we don't have it. I think it was just a matter of Terrell Pryor became available, and they know him. I mean, they're very well acquainted with him, obviously, because John DeFilippo, their offensive coordinator, coached him for 2 years in Oakland as a quarterback, and he had his, whatever kind of success Terrell has had in the NFL came under John DeFilippo.
Hey, Mary Kay, some people, and by that I mean me, wonder with a quarterback depth chart like the one they have here, why wouldn't Terrell Pryor be considered a quarterback for this team? He would seem to be a bigger, faster Johnny Manziel, who we know is coming off a fairly disastrous year. What have you been able to tell? Why are they ready to say they're done with him as a quarterback?
Well, I think more so than anything, they want to see if he can make a go of it as a wide receiver. I think it's, enough teams have given him a shot at quarterback that it's probably kind of been determined amongst the experts, and again, who would know better than John DeFilippo, that perhaps that's just not to be his chance to make it in the NFL. Now, that's not to say that he wouldn't end up as their third quarterback on the roster or their emergency third quarterback on game day. But what they don't want is Terrell Pryor fancying himself a quarterback and not putting 100% into wide receiver. If he's going to make this transition, he has got to be full go 24/7, and he's been doing that for the most part. I mean, you have to give him credit for working out with Randy Moss and Antonio Brown and even Josh Gordon and Josh McCown over the past few weeks.
Mary Kay, day one of training camp. Obviously, fans are rowdy. Which player got the biggest ovation this morning?
Well, obviously the real two, popular ones as they were walking out and doing anything on the field have been Johnny. Johnny still has tremendous support out here. There's no question about that. And then Terrell Pryor. There's just a ton of excitement about him out there. I mean, everybody's watching his every move, and he's actually done some nice things. So I would say those two guys more than anything.
So let me get this straight. The biggest ovation are for two guys that might not help them at all this year?
You know what?
I'm just teasing you. Hey,
you put it that way, yeah, you're
when
right.
you look at these guys offensively, Mary Kay, do you think they're a more talented team than they were last year? Because I would argue that without Jordan Cameron and without Josh Gordon, they're not, and without Brian Hoyer, who I thought was a pretty good quarterback for half that season, I don't think they're as good.
Well, you know what? That remains to be seen. It's a very good point. They think that Josh McCown is an upgrade over Brian Hoyer. When you look at the fact that the Browns only scored 12 touchdown passes last year, there's a reason why that happened. So, yeah, you know what? It's hard to say at this point. But I do think that they are more talented than last year. If for no other reason, they have so many guys coming back from injuries. They've got a lot more depth this year. So there's, you've got the Ronnie Bryants and the Phil Taylors and those kind of guys coming back. And they're going to have to hope that Dwayne Bowe and Brian Hartline and Terrell Pryor can do something on this receiving core.
Mary Kay, one of the position battles that you said you were going to watch, running back, they've got Duke Johnson, the rookie, Isaiah Crowell, Terrence West. According to Twitter, the guy who took the first rep in 11-11, Terrence West. Does that surprise you at all? And what can we read into that, if anything?
Yeah, I actually kind of thought it was going to be Isaiah, but I don't think you should read too much into it. I think they're going to alternate by day. I think one day you'll see Isaiah get those first reps. I think that the other day you'll get Terrence. That's my guess. So yeah, I think they'll mix it up pretty well.
I had heard on radio coming in today, Mary Kay, that Crowell had fumbled a couple of times already. Is that still the biggest issue with him?
Yeah, that is a problem, and there's so much competition now. With Duke Johnson trying to get in here and get playing time too, that there's going to be no margin for error amongst these guys. You've got to be on point.
All right, Mary Kay, Browns beat reporter. Enjoyed day one at training camp. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
And that's an interesting point that you brought up, just about the offense in particular.
Yeah.
Because I think you're hitting on something. And when you have a quarterback like Josh McCown, or if it's going to be Johnny Manziel, those aren't guys that are going to make everybody around them better.
Yeah.
So the question is, do you have that wide receiver to take pressure off of Josh McCown? Do you have that running back to take pressure off Josh McCown? And I think it's still a huge question.
I mean, do you think we've seen anything that would lead us to believe that Dwayne Bowe is going to be an upgrade over Miles Austin?
No.
I don't. Based on what he's done in the league the last few years, I don't think we can say that yet.
And it's funny, Bud, because I went off on Brian Hartline yesterday because he made the comments about, look, if you're wondering where touchdowns are going to come from at wide receiver, then you're very uneducated. And I'm just thinking to myself, all right, well, dude, you had two all of last year. Dwayne Bowe had 0. J.J. Watt's a defensive lineman. He had 3. So, of course, I'm going to ask that question. There are fullbacks in the NFL that had as many touchdown catches as those two guys combined. I think it's an honest question to ask, where are those touchdowns going to come from?
Exactly what I think the offensive coordinator should be worried about right now.
Let's talk some Ohio State football. Big Ten Media Days going on in Chicago. And joining us, 1/3 of our Ohio State reporting team, Doug Lesmerises. What's going on, Doug?
Hey, guys. How are you?
Doing well. So I noticed that the roster for Ohio State of the guys that they brought to Big Ten Media Days does not include Cardale Jones or J.T. Barrett or Braxton Miller. Why do you think they made that choice?
Cardale Jones is too big for Chicago, man. He would set the city on fire. If everybody takes the easy way out on this stuff, people bringing seniors here is a long-standing tradition. And the thing that teams don't realize is, everybody here is going to ask people about the Ohio State quarterback situation, no matter who you bring. So if you don't bring any quarterbacks, they can't ask the quarterbacks, but the left tackle is going to get 50 questions about it. So, you wish Cardale Jones was here or J.T. Barrett was here. There's no way they were going to bring Braxton Miller, even though Braxton Miller was here a year ago when he was coming back off his shoulder injury before things went south. So, you bring the seniors, the guys who represent the team well, and we'll get the quarterbacks later.
Doug, where do you see if you had to guess right now, where would you see the quarterback competition going?
My guess is J.T. Barrett. I thought if Braxton Miller got back healthy all the way, he had a very legitimate shot. But now there's a two-man race. I think it very easily could just boil down to what it did last year, which was in the end J.T. Barrett beat out Cardale Jones. And I don't think that winning the national championship in those 3 games in the postseason gets Jones any kind of edge over what J.T. Barrett did during the regular season. And I think J.T. Barrett could take a big step. You know, when he jumped in last year, he was a redshirt freshman. He'd never played a game of college football before, and he wound up doing what he did. You know, I think he could be, not that they both shouldn't improve, but I think J.T. Barrett could even be a much better quarterback than we saw a year ago, and he was a Heisman candidate a year ago.
Doug, do you think there's a decision that Urban could make when it comes to the quarterback, whether it be Cardale or J.T. Barrett, that a segment of fans would disagree with? Or do you think we're at a point here when it comes to the Ohio State quarterback spot that the fans are just like, well, it doesn't really matter who the quarterback is?
Yeah, I'd be surprised. I don't know if people are going to be out, you know, picketing in the streets for either of the guys. You know, when I asked fans about it at the spring game in April, and there clearly were people had their favorites. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I think the most interesting thing all along I've said and I've written, the most interesting thing is how the guy who's not picked reacts, you know, and especially if it was going to be two guys who are not picked. But, you know, I just think J.T. Barrett, he'll be the starter next year no matter who the starter is this year. And Cardale Jones, I'm going to have a story coming sometime next week. I was hanging out with Cardale Jones at his apartment the other day, and he was playing video games and eating Sour Patch Kids, man. He does not seem like a guy who's worried about much. So I don't think Cardale's going to rock the boat if he's not the guy either.
Doug, I don't know if we've spoken to you since the Braxton Miller decision, but what did you make of it? Everyone seems to say that it was a great decision for his future. How easy will it be for him to step in and play wide receiver with the competition that's already on this team?
By the way, Bud, you never call me anymore. I mean, the fact that we haven't talked, I mean, I'm here, Bud.
I call the other two-thirds of the Ohio State coverage team.
Thanks. I think his shoulder made the decision. You know, I think in the end, if he's saying that he's not ready to fully throw for 2 months, that's the end of the season. What are you going to do? So I think in the end, yes, his best shot at the NFL is something other than quarterback. But you know, I don't know. He was going to go pro after his junior year if he hadn't had the shoulder injury in the Orange Bowl. So he said some stuff then, like, "Oh, I wanted to come back to Ohio State or whatever." And it's like in the end, he admits, no, he was going to go pro. He kind of didn't have a choice. I sort of view this more as, at the moment, he doesn't really have a choice. So I'm not going to give him, you know, it's a very interesting thing. I think you can't, just like Terrell Pryor, you can't snap your fingers and play a new position. He's a very talented individual. But, you know, I think his basically was forced into this, and I think there is going to be some adjustment period. And the other thing is, if he's an H-back, the H-back doesn't get the ball 20 times a game. Yeah. You know, so there's only so much effect he can have.
What does it mean for Ezekiel Elliott to have a guy like Braxton Miller playing H-back, that kind of role that Percy Harvin played at Florida for a guy like Urban Meyer?
You know, when you can hand off to guys on the jet sweep and then fake the jet sweep and hand off inside to Ezekiel Elliott, I mean, it just keeps defenses back on their heels. So it's a huge thing. They had that some last year with Jalen Marshall and Dontre Wilson. I think they'll have it even more with Braxton Miller. It's just the threat. It's like we saw with Ted Ginn Jr. when he was at Ohio State. You don't have to throw deep to Ted Ginn Jr. every time, but the threat changes everything. So, you know, I mean, once Braxton gets into the mode, if he shows he can do that, it will make Ezekiel Elliott better, just like Ezekiel Elliott will make Braxton Miller better.
Doug, one more thing on the quarterbacks. Do you see any scenario where Urban would play both, go into game plans with thinking that he could play both guys, or is he dead set against that?
I don't think there's a reason to. I think that if Braxton was involved, you know, I think if Braxton would have been like the complementary quarterback or would have been part of the two-man thing, I think that was possible. I know Cardale has a big arm, but I mean, it's not like you're going to bring in Cardale on 3rd and long and have him throw down the field or whatever, you know. And I think they trust the culture. They talk about a lot. You know, I mean, I think it's a pretty united team. I think trying to play both just for the sake of playing both would be a bad idea. I think that's what I think, and I think that's what he thinks.
Doug, Ohio State's the #1 team in the Big Ten. Heck, they're the #1 team in the country. Who's the second best team in the Big Ten this year?
Michigan State, by far. I think Michigan State's really good. I think their front seven is going to be pretty good. They have some young guys in the secondary. They need a couple playmakers, but Connor Cook at quarterback is going to be really good. I think Michigan State, the coaches poll just came out, they were 6th. I think Michigan State's like a national title contender. They just have to so happen to go through Ohio State in Ohio Stadium. But I think Michigan State's very good.
All right, Doug Lesmerises in Chicago. Doug, thanks so much for joining us today.
All right, Bud, call me.
I'll call you, Doug.
Big Ten Media Days continuing in Chicago. They start today. They go until tomorrow. cleveland.com/OSU for all of that coverage from Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis, Ari Wasserman. What do you think of Braxton making the move to wide receiver?
Well, I think Doug makes a great point. I do think it was done out of necessity more than him looking at that position and saying, this is where I can really market myself in the NFL. I think playing wide receiver is a lot harder than people think it is, either at the college level or at the pro level. And that's just learning routes and learning how to run them and learning how to sell them, let alone going over the middle when a quarterback, and we've seen a few of these, Chris, might not have that. Might not have the accuracy you would like.
Yeah, I think the good thing, though, about Braxton, if you're comparing it Braxton versus Terrell Pryor, is that Braxton's doing it early here in college. And the college game, I mean, you can get away with like these little bubble screens and just find a way to get the dude the ball in his hands so that he can do the rest.
We saw Greg Little do it gradually at North Carolina, then came here. Terrific athlete, strong guy, big guy, great target. In the end, he had trouble catching the ball. And to think that these guys can walk in and catch the ball as well as you need to in the NFL, I just think is a big if right now.
I know it's a big football day, obviously, with Ohio State and Brown's training camp starting, but the Indians, they made a trade earlier today. Brandon Moss going to the St. Louis Cardinals. The Indians get a prospect back, left-handed pitcher. He's, according to a lot of people, he's the number 3 prospect in the Cardinals organization.
Yeah, very young, a Class A guy, so they may not see him. But, you know, I heard you on radio the other night, and I'd say I have to agree with what you're saying. They really have no other choice right now. They can't stand pat. They might as well try to pick up some assets that either become part of their big league team at some point, or they can use maybe when they have to go chase a hitter. And please, the Dolans, Chris, Mark, chase a hitter. I mean, if they don't have somebody in the middle of that order, and it feels like they haven't had someone there since Albert Bell, and I know they have, but that's how it feels.
I'm curious who that guy is that you would consider.
Don't put me on the spot. We're out of time.
Travis Hafner, maybe? And I agree with you 100% about the hitter, too. I just feel like it's time for the Indians to change their philosophy. And I get it. You know, it's about pitching and it's about defense for them. But look, you're going to continue to have these kinds of situations where you've got this good pitching and you don't have enough offensive support. Do you want to continue to be in that kind of mode? So my hope here is, Bud, that by them acquiring this young left-handed pitcher, that maybe that makes them more willing to deal a guy like Carlos Carrasco, Trevor Bauer, Danny Salazar, because those are the guys that teams are going to be asking for. And rightfully so. They're young, they're under control. If you're going to get somebody that you can put in the middle of your lineup to make a significant difference, you're going to have to give up one of those kinds of pitchers because there's nobody else that you could give up.
And, you know, John Hart's philosophy going way back, I understand it was the steroid era and everything else, but it was getting somebody to make a difference 7 days a week as opposed to that one starting pitcher. And you can say, well, they never won anything with that philosophy. Well, they were still the #1 ranked pitching staff in 1995, and they just happened to fall short. Yeah. And, you know, that kind of team at least brings people to the ballpark every night.
And the other thing that I'm thinking is you have certain guys in certain spots in the lineup, and they shouldn't be in certain spots. Like Dave Murphy was batting cleanup for the Indians, and Ryan Rayburn at times batting cleanup for the Indians. If you put somebody else at the 3 spot or the 4 spot, all of a sudden your everyday lineup, it stretches out, and you put guys in spots where they can actually produce or they can live up to certain kinds of expectations.
Well, I go back to what an American League scout told me when they signed Swisher, and he thought it was they overpaid greatly for him. And he said they were taking a guy who had been a pretty good player on a very good team and asking him to be a very good player on a pretty good team.
Right.
And he was clearly right in that one case. But I think overall that philosophy is pretty sound.
All right, Bud, I appreciate you joining me today, stepping in for Dan Lobby.
Great to be here.
All right, and thanks to Doug Lesmerises from Chicago, Big Ten Media Days, our Ohio State reporter, Mary Kay Cabot from Brown's training camp. He's Bud Shaw. I'm Chris Fedor. Thanks to all of you for your questions and for joining us today on Sports Insider.
And our live audience.
That's right. We had a live audience, and we still made it through somehow, some way. The football team from Ravenna joining us today here on Sports Insider because we have high school media days going on as well. So thanks to all of you for joining us here on cleveland.com. We'll talk next Thursday. Later.